my absence from India has not been a happy thing for me, in truth, because I really love being here. I say to my friends that India's like a vitamin for me, and if I'm away too long, I sort of get a deficiency. I've had the opportunity to come many times since 1986. In 1986, we brought a pilgrimage group of Americans to India to walk in the footsteps of Paramahansa Yogananda. And over 20 years, actually, we did that 11 or 12 times, all of those spots. We even went to Kashmir at the beginning to the Shankaracharya temple because it was safe to go for white faces at that time. But eventually we had to stop. But then Swami moved here, and so I've come many times. But the last couple of years, a year and a half, just other things that intervened and I haven't been able to. Coming here, as you know, I was brought here because of the health crisis that Christian was facing. Many of you may know that for 10 years before they came to India, almost the 10 years immediately before, they lived in Palo Alto, so we were all very good friends there. And when I heard that she was ill, I said to Surendrana, I have this window of just a few days, and I'm going to be all the way in Europe, and I'll just come the rest of the way to India. And God is very interesting. I'm on my way to Israel, actually. The next time, I was saying, the next time I put on my jammies and lie down with a pillow and actually read the television, which is, I've wanted to go to Israel ever since I can remember. I was raised in a Jewish family, so I wanted to go to Israel as a Jew. Then I came to Ananda, and I began to learn about the life of Christ, so I wanted to go to Israel for the lightsaber Christ life. But in all these years, I never have. So when this fall came around and I was trying to make plans, I was making plans to travel in the U.S. and lecture. I just said, I don't want to. I don't want to do any of that. I really want, and now's the time I want to go to Jerusalem. I've always had such a deep connection with the life of Jesus that when I read about it or talk about it, I can almost see it. I feel like all the years of experience I had with Swamiji and all that I heard him say about Master really made for me the life of a great soul extremely vivid. It doesn't feel to me when I hear about the disciples talking to each other and what Jesus said to them. It doesn't feel far away to me. It doesn't feel mythical or incomprehensible. I can just sort of see it. There's a scene at the Last Supper when Jesus is predicting that Judas is going to betray him. And Jesus is hinting to them that his life is about to end. And he's warning them that things are going to happen. And he says, I'm going someplace where you can't follow. And they all protest, we'll follow you anywhere. And then he says, well, one of you won't. One of you, in fact, before the night is over, is going to betray me. And then they all are very disconcerted by this. But this is the part I love. John, who then wrote the Gospel of John, St. John, apparently had a greater capacity to speak directly to Jesus than the others. This I gather from this. Because it says, the disciple said to John, you ask him who he's talking about. I mean, it's just a sentence in the Bible. But if you've been in the company of exalted souls, you realize how that is. That one person will have a different relationship and you can just ask things that other people can't get away with. So all the disciples want John to solve this mystery. So he does. He speaks to Jesus, and Jesus says, the one I'm going to dip this bread and the one to whom I hand it will do this thing. So he hands it to Judas and says, that which you are about to do quickly. It's interesting, I might have to spend too much time on the New Testament, but it was because Jesus remained Judas's guru. And it was almost like Jesus himself gave him permission. This is a karma you're going to have to carry out, but don't think for a minute I'm not with you even as you do it. It's really extremely touching when you think of it like that. Because after that, I'm just well, I just having said all that about that, I'm very eager for this trip. Almost too eager. I've had to do a little, yogic breathing and think, everything passes, nothing's forever. It's a fly. But I had to do a retreat in the east coast of the U.S., which is all the way across the country from where I live. which put me closer to Europe and closer to everything. But I had a window of a week in between, and I was planning to spend it in Assisi. I had many old and dear friends there that I hadn't seen in a long time, and that's of course where Swami passed, and I wanted to meditate in his room. I went there immediately after Swami died, April 21st, 2013, but it was a tumultuous time on so many levels. I wasn't able to feel it just even as I thought I would. I had it all planned, just all planned, worked out just like that. And then Tushti was the woman talking to surrender. I thought, well, if I were in the hospital, I would like to see my friends. So I said, I'll come. And it all worked out for me to be here. I just had to go and fly. There's a little piece of my heart that, I had it all planned. I was going to eat pasta, drink cappuccino. It was all set. But what I really wanted to do was I wanted to be heart to heart with my Guru ones. And because I have friends in the Assisi, that was really the picture. I just wanted to go somewhere and be really heart to heart with Guru ones. So I came here and found myself heart to heart with my Guru ones. Been in the hospital with Tushti and Surrender for the last 3 days. And it's personal, our friendship. But I really also appreciate it on the deepest possible level. What a bond we have in Master. And even though a great deal of our energy and attention often goes to the Gurus, and we think about Swamiji, who he is to us, who Master is to us, Babaji, Lahiri, everyone, we prostrate ourselves, we make every offering we can. Well, when Master created this way of expressing the ancient teachings, which he said was not a new religion, but he specifically said it was a new expression of that. Now you see, he showed up in America where we knew nothing about this. It was old, new, ancient, modern. We didn't have the foggiest idea. It just showed up and there it was. And then for those of us who learned from Swamiji, he was American, so he translated the whole thing. I didn't know we weren't Hindus, I have to tell you, until I came to India for the first time. And then all of a sudden I saw, wow, this is really, what we're doing in America doesn't have a lot to do with the cultural traditions of this. Because the cultural traditions are just their own reality. And I realized, of course, I grew up Jewish, but I still was in a Christian country, so when I was all the communities are all mixed up together. So I was very conscious of what Christianity was in America. And I realized Master brought was not Christian either. It was no more Christian than it was Hindu. That's what I finally figured out. It was exactly what he said it was. It was a new expression. Ancient teaching, new expression for a new Yuga. A wholly new way of going at this, which includes the fact that it is both Jesus and Krishna, and his mission was to teach from the New Testament, to teach from the Gita, to show that what Krishna taught is what Jesus taught, and to bring the whole thing into a completely new reality that requires of us really an expansion of consciousness from wherever we've been living comfortably. I remember when I was talking to Swamiji about, we do the Festival of Light, and sometimes here we do it every week. In America, we have a very church-going tradition, and that, although I have pointed out that India is the land of rituals, so it seems like this is where ritual lives and breathes, but we do it more consistently there. But it refers to Jesus in various ways, and there was question about whether or not we don't want to be imposing Christianity on India. I said, well, they impose themselves on us. Do you think the ideas of Guru and reincarnation was natural to the West? Not at all. If we had to expand to include a reality that was, we were not born into them in the same way. On both sides, we all have to sort of, it's not exactly we're meeting in the middle, because that implies that we're taking a little of this and a little of that. But Master said it's a new expression. It's just, it's Dwapara Yuga, it's not Kali Yuga. And that which worked and was necessary in Kali Yuga is not necessary for Dwapara Yuga. And even though we're kind of a transition world here, where a whole lot of those old customs and rituals still hold us, and just hold our hearts. It's not really like captive to them, but they hold our hearts. And at the same time, we're also looking for, we're just living on such a different planet. It's immediately in another planet. So when Master came to America and was bringing this new dispensation, as he also called it self-realization. Well, that's obvious. But then he also called it fellowship. And of course, in America, what YSS here is called Self-Realization Fellowship there. And now, almost 20 years ago, after Ananda being what it was for a long time, Swamiji wanted to take, those words, because as he was expressing to us, self-realization is the essence of what we're doing. That is the new expression. That is the underlying reality of every true religion. Instead of making it the underlying reality, let's make it reality. What are we here for? Self-realization. And everything else rolls out after that. But then he added that word fellowship, which seems, when you think about it, really such a contradiction, isn't it? Because this is deeply and truly our relationship to God. Our own relationship to God. That's what self-realization is. But he put that word fellowship, and it's the word sangha, satsanga in India. But what he was also saying in a very true sense is that we're also actually doing this together. A friend of mine had a dream that she felt was a superconscious dream. And it was, she was standing on the big meadow at the Ananda Village community, which some of you have seen in the movie Finding Happiness, or some of you who have been there, I know. And in the dream, there was a great big circle of Ananda devotees, many of whom she knew, but not all of them. But she knew that they were all Ananda devotees. And she said we were all standing in a circle holding hands. And she doesn't remember whether we were chanting or actually doing anything, but we stood there together, and then every so often, one of us would transcend all limitation, she said. And there would be a sort of swirl of energy, and then that person's form would evaporate and they'd go up in light. And she said what was so meaningful, of course it was beautiful in itself, was that one tends to think about one's own salvation, and one might think, oh, I wish it was me. Am I next? And you're kind of trying to make yourself known to the Lord. Over here, over here. But she said what she felt, which was so touching, was that when anyone in the circle rose spiritually, everyone felt that they'd also been uplifted. And she said there was actually no feeling of difference between whether it was your freedom or mine, because we are fellowship. We are living together in this reality. And through life, all of us, we have birth families, we have relatives, we have work companions, neighbors, all the different people that we associate with. And many things hold us together. Some birth families are quite in tune with each other on deeper levels. But many are held together by the fact of shared reality. The physical body defines who's part of your family in that sense. And we presume we chose them for good reasons, and we hope we chose them for spiritual reasons, but that doesn't mean we're always kindred spirits, because the relationship is based on temporary identity, which is the physical identity when the time comes to pass. Surendra and I were talking about how often someone will die when all their relatives are not in the room. It's just, I've seen it. In fact, I've had people come to me filled with guilt because they stepped out of the room for just 5 minutes, and that's when their father chose to leave this world, or their mother. No, I said, well, they can't. Often they can't leave me for that. And it could be your attachment to them, but it's also their attachment to you. And this is the time to just let it go. So often they have to wait until there's a clear space. And they'll take that 2 minutes, and you just went down and make a phone call, and you slip out of this planet. And even though your soul connection, if it's there, will always remain. That which was defined by the physical body, once the physical body is gone. So these ties that we have as disciples of the same Master, just think how long we've been doing this together. Just so many incarnations in so many forms. And not all of them harmonious. Swamiji once said, I myself was having a very difficult time with a woman in our community. We detested each other, just for no particular reason. We projected upon each other the worst of all human qualities, and then we supported it with past life memories. Swami finally scolded us and said to me, yes, it's true, you've both been evil in the past, but you're not evil now. And he encouraged us to get out of the past and into the present. And he said quite simply, he said, this is a very old spiritual technique. And over the course of all the time that we've been together, the Master talks about having been Arjuna, and William the Conqueror, and the King of Spain, and who knows what else. Swamiji became quite persuaded at the end of his life that Jesus himself was a former incarnation of Master. Which I love that. He was Arjuna with Krishna, and maybe he was Jesus himself, and he came to put the whole thing back together. Just distressed about the whole story, so he returned. But the point is, how many times it was Masters incarnate? And how often it was some of the time, I hope, we come with him. Or soon after the Swami But we're very old family. And Swamiji said in all his incarnations, he said, we've been all to one another. We've been in love with each other and in conflict with each other over and over again. But the physical relationship lasts compared to eternity, just like that. But that soul contact where we keep seeking God, life after life after life, and help each other in all possible ways. We help each other through conflict, and we help each other through support. We help each other through difficult times. We celebrate together. So much happens which brought me to Pune. Because my dear friends are going through an opportunity to grow spiritually, and I wanted to be part of it. I was thinking when I first walked into Sushi's hospital building, we'll see her soon because she's really only up now. I understand she was much worse than before I got here. And I walked into the room, and the first thing I thought of was, Master says, it doesn't matter what happens to us. The only thing that matters is what we become through what happens to us. And that's a big order. We have to ask it over and over again. So there we are. We're becoming something else than we were. I sometimes say God's taken an unwelcome interest in your spiritual development, but nonetheless He's interested, and He's provided you opportunities to become something that you weren't before. And such times are cause for very deep celebration in the most unusual way. We tend to define God's gifts in terms of that which is easy and pleasurable, and bad karma in terms of that which is inconvenient and sometimes painful. But from whose perspective does that come? We all want it to be easy. It's this subconscious, tamasic attitude that we have that who wants to put out energy. And it's a strange thing. Swamiji didn't have that. Swamiji had no attraction to low energy. It was so interesting. I've been on holiday with him many times. After dinner he would say, well, when shall we have breakfast? 8:30? We think, how about 11? So he would just never, even when we were on holiday, he always kept the energy high. Because that's really where we grow. But in our lives, we don't grow from not being asked to become more than we are. And so whenever we're being asked to become more than we are, however that looks, and self-definitions are shattered, inconvenience is blown apart, then all of a sudden we discover, oh yes, behind that there's grace. I've heard for so many years Swamiji talk about suffering, happiness, it's all the same. I can't honestly say that I believe him. I can't disbelieve him, because I know he tells the truth. But I prefer that which is pleasurable. But I've become to appreciate recently that what I may have called happiness was not really happiness. It was that the world was pleasing me. And I don't think that's good enough, because it just leaves us to have enormous lessons to learn. Do we really, in our whole heart and being, understand and accept that God is always in charge? And so I was brought to India sort of not kicking and screaming. Hardly I volunteered, and I was delighted to come. But I thought of going away with my friends in Assisi for God until I got here. That in God we're all one. And that's what really unites us. When Ananda expanded itself for many years, the first 16 years virtually of Ananda life, when I was there, Ananda was one community in one spot on the whole planet. None of this was even, well, Swami always knew about it. Swami used to tell us this. In the early 70s, he told us, well, first we'll go to Europe, and then we'll go to Australia, then we'll go to India. And he said, Indians will like it better if it's an international work instead of an invasion of Americans. That's how he put it. Europe did work, Australia was pretty cold. But he just always saw it. And then he said he stopped talking about what Ananda would become. And I have to tell you, this was a conversation that happened on the porch of a little tiny dome where he lived in, not where he lives now, but in this little tiny place, no electricity. We did have running cold water, no facilities, nothing. We were absolutely impoverished. We were just scratching along, basically to survive. And he's telling us we're going to go all around the globe. But he said, after a while he noticed instead of inspiring people, it scared them. Because it was too much of a challenge. We were just going to hunker down into our comfortable little life and make our little cabin, and we were just going to stay there. But it doesn't necessarily matter at all. Much more. Because this is the responsibility. This isn't just for us. And so we always get to be challenged. Master wrote something. It was a talk he gave in 1937, which was later published in the Self-Realization Fellowship magazine about 1997. The article was called World Conditions. And because it was 1937, he was talking about World War I. I think he may have referenced the freedom movement in India, or the general movement away from colonization. He talked about the depression in America and in other parts of the world. He also talked about the Spanish flu epidemic, tsunami, tornadoes, hurricanes, and a few other things. But what Master did is he drew a cause and effect relationship between all these different things. The suffering on the battlefields in World War I brought about the Spanish influenza, which killed more people than he killed in the war. And because of the effect of the influenza, the depression happened over here, and because of the depression over here, there was tsunamis and hurricanes here. And he went like this, just one after another, telling us that on a vibrational level, all of these different realities were making the other happen. He could see that, and therefore he could declare it. Well, it's very interesting just to think about it like that, but the opposite balancing reality of it occurred to me recently. If dark energy can have that much power that we can't discern, but the Master can see it, think how much greater is the power of light. And so here we are, relatively small group of people. I mean, the room is nicely filled, and it's lovely to see you all. But we're not hundreds or thousands, and most of the city is just going on as if this weren't happening. You know, they're on their own. At the same time, what cause and effect is being set into motion by the vibrations of light that we ourselves are putting in. Whether we're putting it out by a private devotion in our own home, meditation, chanting in front of our own altar, coming together as you often do here and as we do all over the Ananda world, and amplifying that spiritual vibration by making it share. You know, all of us feel that. You've got your own voice when you're chanting, but then you have the voice of everyone else. You have your own consciousness when you're meditating, but then you have the consciousness of everyone else. And these forces are never dissipated. Whenever there is an actual contact with God, Master said that vibration stays forever. He tells the story of when he first went to see Dr. Lewis at his home. Dr. Lewis, I presume at that time, must have lived in the home that he was born in. Because Master was walking up the stairs to the second story, and he came to a landing on the stair, and he stopped, and he said, a divine experience happened right here. And Dr. Lewis said that when he was 6 years old, he'd been visited by an angel right on that spot. And Master walked into the house 20-some years later, and without any being told anything, he said it was a divine experience for him on the spot. Master said, wherever the great Master lives, those vibrations exist forever. That's the principle of pilgrimage. Of course, that you're walking into something. Swamiji said something very interesting on this. When he was a child, he used to fall asleep. Whenever he would close his eyes as a child, and this was his earliest memory, his mother would put him down to sleep. He would shut his eyes and he would see a great light in front of him. He would stare into that light, and that light would expand and expand, and then he would be absorbed in that light, and he would go to sleep, he thought. He thought everyone went to sleep that way. This is what he did. He just thought everybody would lay down and shut their eyes, saw the light expanded, they went into the light. He was 9 or more before he began to find out this isn't what everybody did. And he began to feel, he became very ill when he was 9, and he said he became suspicious of all altered states because he had such a bad delirium, fever, and so on. Plus it was karma he had to pull away from that. But what he said was, later when he became a disciple of Master and learned to meditate and went into a superconscious state, he immediately recognized it as what he had gone into as a child. But then he said something else. He said it was the same moment. Because in his life as a human being, much time had passed. But in the superconscious state, there was no time. So no time had passed. He'd gone into the light as a child, now as an adult he went into the light, and it was just the same. And how we actually get our minds around that, I'm not sure. But what we're talking about is a power so great, and we are always being the instruments for it. And light is always more powerful than darkness, no matter how it appears. And when you think about changes in history, it's always the great spiritual figures that are written about. Real transformation of the planet is always the avatars. No matter what their incarnations turn out like. Speaking of Jesus, talk about a life that did not work out in terms of pleasure and ease. That was a real bad one. Nothing. It was just, it fizzled as far as any worldly perspective was concerned. But it was like a pulse that just wouldn't stop. And it just kept pulsing and pulsing and pulsing. And people who had known Jesus told other people about him. And they believed the one who told them. I never met, never known him. But Swamiji told me about him. And when Swami told me about him, I could feel his presence. In fact, I had Autobiography of a Yogi, and I tried to read it. But I was already into his teaching, but I was a very intellectual Vedantist. So in Masters, he's so lighthearted and playful and at ease, and on page 9, the hearing materializes in the weak field. And I just couldn't deal with any of that. I just wanted this sort of very rigid, Advaita kind of, and this was beyond me. That's how we have dealt with it, isn't it? Now, coming all the way back to spiritual family, one of the things that happens when spiritual family is together for a long time, and I have now, because I've had the good karma, for which I thank you over and over, just started Ananda so young. I was 22 when I met Swami, and not quite 24 when I took up residence in the Asha. I never done anything else. And I've been solidly a part of 2 different communities, plus going everywhere. So, went everywhere. People I've known for decades and decades and decades. And you see each other through a lot. And we walk together, and you go through those difficulties, and year after year after year, you begin to really we begin to be able to stand in that circle that my friend dreamed about and realize that everybody's salvation is our salvation. You all know Haridas because he lives now in Bangalore. Haridas is known for his marvelous little proverbs. He just is terrific at this. But one Haridasism that I always remembered and loved, this was from that first 10 years. Haridas just said in his very enthusiastic, childlike way, he said, you know, it's a good thing that my spiritual liberation will help others, otherwise I know I wouldn't try so hard. Another wonderful Haridas moment was when he had done something somewhat ill-considered, let's just say that. I won't reveal anything more than that. It was all the dream, and the only thing that remains is what's good. But it seemed like a good idea at the time to him, but it proved not to be. And because we were a smaller family then, everybody knows everybody's business. It's a sweet family, but we all know everybody's business. We just do. In fact, there's an interesting fact about Ananda, even still. It's like we're all on one nerve wire. You can hardly ever be the first to tell someone news. Everybody seems to just intuit it at the first moment. But Haridas had done something unwise and was recovering from his poor judgment. And as part of his recovery, he just decided, everybody knows anyway, shame is one of the fetters of the heart. What am I ashamed of? I'm just a person trying to get free. So he and I, we're not personality friends, but we were friends because we were doing it together. He just walked right up to me, just like this. He said, I know you know already, what do you think? I said, Haridas, with an attitude like that, your liberation is assured. Who cares? Doesn't matter what happens to us, it's only what we become through it. That's just where we're always working. And what I was going to say is, when the family's together for a long time, and today you're down and someone lifts you, tomorrow you're up and you're lifting someone else. My friend Shivani, she and I used to live together in the trailers in those first early years, and she got ill with a fever, a really high fever. And we were just doctors, and we just were very primitive. I was helping her through the night by putting cold compresses on her body, and it was a pretty intense job. And she just said she was thanking me for staying up all night, jokingly, but also seriously. I said, Shivani, it's money in the bank as far as I'm concerned. Anything I take care of you today, you take care of me. And really, what's the difference? Remember when the monks were carrying Master up the stairs because he was taking the karma on his knees and he couldn't walk. And so you are so kind to me, he said. And then the monk said to me, Master, you do everything for us. It's the least we can do for you. And then the Master just said, God helping God, that is his part. And that's how we need to begin to look at each other. Just we have all these personalities, and personalities are kind of a nuisance. But we've all got them. And they're okay. Not ending tonight, and not finishing it, so finishing part of the story here. I came into Trishti's hotel room, hospital room. So then he brought me into the hospital room. And it's just who we are, God helping God. And all the thought of where I've been or what I would have done, anything, nothing matters. We just come together heart to heart, and that's all we're ever trying to give. And then God just begins to take care of it in the next way. And with longing and regret, even for a moment. We never know. We never know when your life is over. You hear so many stories of people. A friend of mine, her husband, got up in the night and stepped from the bedroom into the bathroom, but he actually stepped momentarily over into the astral world. Just one step like that. I always think about that. I often think about that. I get up in the night to go into the bathroom. I lift my foot rather gingerly and think, am I actually going to stay? I'm just like, but it's marvelously fun to think, what if? What if this is actually the moment when my soul is going to be called out of its body? Where am I? What am I wanting? What am I living with? And do I really want to carry on with it? And it's such a power. Once you really, really believe in karma, the way Master teaches it, which is perhaps more dynamic to my experience than the tradition of India always offers. The Master's teaching of it, Swami's teaching of it is extremely dynamic. And it says simply that what is happening to you today is a result of the energy you put out yesterday. And what will happen to you tomorrow is the result of the energy you're putting out today. No exceptions, no loopholes, no bargains, no reneging on the contract, nothing, zero. It's always true. And I get riled up about something, and all I can think to myself is, do you want to see this again? Do you really want to make this little girl one more time? Why don't you just come to peace with it now? It's not always possible. Abilities in the spine are sneaky, really sneaky. And we just don't always know what's really holding us. And Master doesn't expect us to know. And that's what I was saying after so many years. I got distracted by thinking about Haridas when he was young. Haridas was only 18 when he came to the ashram. And we were all around the age of 24, but Haridas was always the youngest. So it was very disconcerting for us when his hair began to turn gray, because the indications for all of us were there. Haridas is turning gray, that probably means that I'm getting old too. But I watched myself and the cycle of the spiritual path, and I've really come to understand it extremely differently than I did at the beginning. At the beginning it was all very dramatic. And I remember reading Master saying, if you learn to meditate, you'll have within yourself a portable paradise. I read that probably 1970. And I thought to myself, maybe 5 years. 5 years, then I'll just have that good old portable paradise and it'll just go everywhere with me. I remember thinking that, how long did it take after all, And of course 5 years passed and I wasn't exactly portable, wasn't always with me. And just all these thoughts you have in your mind, especially because I was intellectual rather than devotional, so I thought it out in very different ways. I analyzed it. I remember saying to Swami, somehow ignorance is so blinding that we tend to think that if we just do more of what we're already doing, as if they say, you'll get a different result. I was very intellectual, and it wasn't working for me, so I thought if I just became more intellectual, that would work for me. A certain gap in logic there, which caused me to say to Swami, I need to improve my powers of analysis, I said to Swami. He was sitting in this soft chair, this armchair, and I was sitting in front of him. I know this didn't actually happen, but this is what I thought happened, what I sort of felt happened, is that Swami rose from the armchair and said, no! Just like that. I can't imagine that he actually physically moved, but I believe he just projected this enormous amount of energy toward me that made me feel like his body was actually coming toward me. I felt he kind of grabbed for my concept that I needed to become even more intellectual. He just kind of tried to suck it out of the Akashic record, or just burn it up so it wouldn't even just be there for me to remember. And then he sat down and he said, devotion. What means devotion? But I didn't understand for many years. But in those early years, I just thought you could think it out and sort of line yourself up and make it happen. It was all about my willpower, my desire, my commitment. When I first heard environment is stronger than willpower, also my response was not stronger than mine. Just like that. Not exactly a disciple's attitude, but that's how I felt. Because I thought it was just all about this. I didn't understand that we were just like we heard in Asha, we're just a kitten in our mother's mouth. We just live and breathe by God's grace, and everything is moving through us. And it just doesn't come out tidy. It's not like we can just line it all up and make it work and do everything right. One of the topics for our weekly satsang a few weeks ago at Sunday morning, it was how to cope with tests or something like that. We have these two ugly ways of the one night. I've been doing this for 25 years or whenever they first started, so I've seen them all a lot. And I have to come up with a new idea each time. But I realized, and I said to everyone, coping with tests is important. But what's more important is what you do after you fail. Because we will continuously fail, all of us fail to live up to the ideal we can imagine. And to persevere after you fail is actually the difference between success and failure. It doesn't matter what happens to us, it only matters what we become through what happens to us. People often ask me about what is success on the spiritual path, or want tips or something like that. And I've become so simplistic in all of this. I said the only consistent feature I can see that is essential for spiritual success is don't quit. And I don't just mean don't quit in the sense of keeping Master's pictures around your house. I mean don't retreat. Don't hide. Don't become ashamed. Don't become discouraged. Don't be good. Just look. If I could have done it better, I would have done it better. One of my favorite mantras is, it seemed like a good idea at the time. But if we suddenly realize it isn't, then all we have to do is just pick up where we left off and just keep going forward. And if you keep doing that, there's a promise that Master made. And I didn't understand it. It didn't make any sense to me. To those who persevere to the end, he said, I or one of the other masters will be there to take them across. And what that's talking about is Swamiji describes death as the final exam, which is all of the qualities and all the lessons you've been working on all come together when the soul exits, because your vibration, whatever you've made it, all the riches in your spine, everything, will meet the light. And will you go into the light or not? That's your question. So it's the final exam. So when the Master promises to meet you there, there's a story of Ramana Maharshi helping one of his devotees through, also his mother, 2 stories. And it talked about, and I can't remember which is the mother and which is the disciple, but it doesn't matter for the point of the story. He sat there and essentially, by intuitive connection with his disciple, the disciple was moving toward the light, and then the various karmas would arise. The various longings and the various regrets, the various self-identities that he was not able to shed. And the Master would put his vibration into the disciple, and then that would clarify the disciple, and he was able to choose the light and let go of the limitation. And in that way he was moving the disciple. And one of them, I think it was his disciple, and it was different, it was not. He brought the disciple over into the light, how the story is told. And then he thought it was settled, and he felt it rain passing, it was done, and he turned away. And in that moment, a little bit of karma slipped in and grabbed him. And so instead of being fully free, he had to do it. But when the mother died, he stayed until he was certain. I mean, it's a funny story, but it's interesting. But you see, if the Master, one of the gurus, will be with you in that, how much difference it makes. All of you were kind enough to come because I've come a long distance and you have this unusual opportunity to be here. If Swami Kriyananda was still in the body and came to Pune, everyone would rush to be with him. We couldn't begin to hold such an event in this room. And we would all want to be with him, because when we are in the presence of his vibration, our vibration is different. And what we experience is not an imposition of his vibration on ours. It's a remembrance within ourselves of who we really are. Think of that. Think of the Master with you when you're looking at the light and needing to let go. And he's there, vibrating exactly who we really are. And what Master said about how we merit that to those who persevere to the end. He didn't say to those who never missed their creeds. He didn't say to those who gave full 10% of their income to support the center, who didn't become president. He didn't say anything. He just said, don't quit. We really think about this, because we all have so So much karma. Just accept it, get over it. But if in the midst of it, you never let go, you never forget focus. You could be the last disciple on the list, but you're on the list, and that's all you have.